missing that.
Yay.
Can you move the?
Yes, I can. And the
We're not ready for y'all yet. Hang on.
there we go.
Ready? Come on.
Yep.
Okay. You said you were ready.
I was, and then I went, oh crap. Good morning.
That one bottle of water is going to throw off the whole thing.
Yeah, it was.
Good morning and welcome to the Sun Dragon Sideshow.
The Dear Becky and Lizzie edition, but we don't have any questions, so we came up with our
We
own.
get to do what we want. Yay. Hello. And okay, almost all my ends are woven in. So look, that spot that Liz said, there's a problem. There's no problem.
There's no
anymore.
problem anymore.
Because I sewed in the ends and I crisscrossed and I did my voodoo magic. I didn't get around to one end, but I did make this shorter at home. I yanked on it and yeah, there's another, yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna shove this back in now. We're gonna act like
It's
all my
so
ends
good.
are woven in. Ta-da!
Yay!
It's already, I will say with this yarn is really, really, really soft cotton, right? We've talked about that before. It's the same yarn as our yarn of the week, but different colors. It's already fuzzy. And the bottom is already having things. If I look at it too closely, it looks like it's been,
It does.
but that's because it's soft cotton. But see, you all at home just see the beauty of what it looks like from far away. The moral of that is all yarn gets a little funky with time. And sometimes it doesn't take so long for it to get funky.
And the softer it is,
the more likely it is
more
for that
likely
to
it is.
happen. So we've had, I'm getting ahead of myself because we haven't even introduced ourselves yet, but we've had customers come into the shop because I have to finish my thought.
yeah.
We have customers come into the shop who say, yeah, it's really cheap yarn. It's already, it's pilled already. And I'm thinking that happens with fancy expensive yarn too. So
T-shirts, jeans. It happens with
yeah,
everything.
t-shirts, it does, but t-shirts and jeans don't usually make people think of fancy yarn.
No.
Is where my brain is going.
Yeah.
But to say, like, try not to judge a yarn based on how bad it pills, because pilling is more of a factor of friction. And when you're curvy like me, there's lots of friction that happens when you just move through life. So yeah, so that's our mini lesson number 1. Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm the owner of Sun. Look, it even says on my name tag, I'm the owner of Sun Dragon Art and Fiber. And kind of looks like it might be a decent day outside Brevard, North Carolina.
I'm Liz. And the minion.
You're like, yes, her name tag is worn on her like quasi pocket. Yeah. What? You're the weather minion. So
it was supposed to be warmer than yesterday. And it's supposed to be nice. At least
good
for a couple more.
Because was it yesterday that rained? Or was it 2 days
Day
ago?
before yesterday.
I can't tell days apart anymore.
Tuesday.
I'm a puddle getting ready for all these events.
It's okay. I'm missing days in the future because I was like, we only have tomorrow and Saturday to get ready.
She said that yesterday.
And you're missing days in the past. So we're balancing.
We balance out. No. Okay. I have my coffee today. I did not forget it at home. I should drink it. So, we have a couple of thoughts of what to do with today, but before we get too into craziness, do you want to show off your stuff?
I can show off my stuff.
Because we said we'd show it off and we kind of like just get people a glimpse of it. Yes, 2 days ago?
2 days ago.
Can't tell time anymore. Life is just life. And then we can talk about the things we were going to potentially think about talking about and then see when we run out of time.
So a while ago, I was looking for, the world's thinnest yarn because
she needs a new challenge.
I need a new challenge. And
my response to that is, but you don't like knitting with the little stuff.
I don't.
And you tried with.
And I tried with big stuff and it didn't work.
Yeah.
And
I will let her tell.
I have a knot. Anyway,
you were gentle with it. It didn't stay a knot.
I found ethereal weight yarn.
Ethereal. But she
I'm
calls
sorry.
it ethereal, and that we just go with that.
I can't.
For
some
all you
reason,
English speakers, not Elvish
ethereal
speakers,
just
it's
doesn't
ethereal.
work in my head.
It's okay. From now on, it will henceforth be known as ethereal.
Yes, Lord of the Rings.
I'm just for people who want to go look it up and maybe
Yes.
can't spell phonetically the way you're saying it, which it does actually look the same, kind of. But if people might be confused if they've heard it a different way, so
Yeah.
Now we're calling it ethereal.
In my head, ethereal is just the Elvish way of pronouncing ethereal. So
And don't we all want to be Elvish in that way?
it is 1,860 yards per 25 grams.
You wore the wrong shirt to be showing this off.
Did.
But that's okay. We don't think about our wardrobe when we film.
No, it's
that much.
Hard to see in the glare, but it's thinner than
shiny.
Sewing. It's
just
thinner
shiny.
than sewing thread. It's
well,
like
yeah. Like hold up, like just the I can't even find it. Like can we find a dark spot here? Do you mind if I?
No, I don't.
Sorry, I've already taken it.
Oh,
can you see that?
It looks like a cobweb.
Yeah, it looks like there should be a spider off camera. Sorry, I said the word spider for.
It recommends a 40 knitting needle, which is a 1.25 millimeter knitting.
And when
needle.
she says 40, she means 0000, not a 4.0. Like there's a 0, there's like a US 1, there's a US 0, and then there's a US 00, and then 000, and quadruple 0 is what she's talking about.
And actually,
teeny tiny.
I found a list that had a 50 needle.
When I've gone shopping online for things for the shop, like I found kits and other things, goes down to a 000. Is usually the smallest you're going to find commercially available.
Yeah. So I am doing.
What millimeters is the quadruple 0?
It is 1.25 millimeter.
When they get that small, they tend to get smaller by like 1/4 millimeter. Like anything from a 2 down tends to get smaller by, say, a 1/4 millimeter. That's not very much.
I went up a whole millimeter size from the 40 needle to a 1.
So you're on a 1.
I'm on a 1,
but
which is
the
a
2.25
2.25 millimeter.
Yes. Numbers and knitting needles. This is our
There we go.
second little mini lesson. Oh yeah. See, I figured it would show up on your skirt.
Yeah.
This is our second mini lesson. Numbers for US sizes of knitting needles have nothing to do with how thick they are, other than the larger the number, the thicker the needle.
Yes.
And then when we run out like zeros, you have to start making multiple zeros. And the same thing with paintbrushes, actually.
Yeah.
The more zeros on it, the smaller it is. So it's just like 0 times 0, which is 0, but they call it 00. Anyway. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Okay.
But I can go on about the needles in a second, but you're holding.
I got 2 rows done on it last night.
I was gonna say, is it bigger than last time?
Just slightly.
It
2
does
rows.
it looks a little bigger. Now explain again, because everyone who came in the shop yesterday was asking why.
I have a weight on it.
Yeah, what is that thing hanging off of it, and why do you have it?
I have a weight hanging off of it because when it's up on the needle, it wants to roll.
To roll around the needle.
To roll
around the
needle.
cable.
Yeah.
If it's not pulled down by
Yeah.
something.
So
That's how lightweight it is. Oh my gosh.
it is like the thinnest. Oh my gosh. And it feels like, did you feel it yesterday? It feels so just amazingly teeny tiny.
It feels teeny tiny. It doesn't
but
necessarily feel soft,
but it feels
teeny tiny.
It feels softer than like sewing thread.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, but I tried doing it on a 10. It snapped every time. And I tried like multiple times.
And why do you think it snapped? Did it snap just trying to force it up on the needle?
I think the cashmere in it has the tiny little hairs that grab hold, and it won't stretch out even, like it just doesn't want to play on big needles at all. And in fact, I noticed last night when I was sliding this back up, it's so teeny tiny that
it catches on
it catches on the join. Like running my finger, there's no
the join on a Chaogu is pretty darn smooth. It's not 100% because almost nothing is. But
this is so teeny tiny that it just barely catches on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that, and they also sold gossamer weight. This is getting
which transitions. Yes, I do want to talk a little bit more about needles before we fully transition.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Gossamer weight is the next weight up from the ethereal. It's 899 yards per 25 grams. And look, I got it in red.
Of course you did.
Shock face. It's here.
They just look like big blobs on camera.
Yeah, I know. It-
But one is thicker than the other.
this one's
believe it or
half
not.
the diameter of this one.
Like an
just
individual
for-
strand.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. So before, like, we can use that to transition into like
Yes.
more general weights of yarn. Just my follow-up on the needle thing. So the larger than the US number, the thicker the needle, but it's not like it's not always an equal increment. Like when they're teeny tiny, they go up by 0.25 millimeters. And then in the middle, they jump by half millimeter. Like once you hit maybe like a 5 or a 6, I think it's a 6. Once you hit a US 6, they start jumping by half millimeter. And then as they get really big, they start jumping by a whole millimeter or more. And like I would go to my website and our online shop and the Chow Goose and stuff. I think I have the drop down
Mhm.
menu marked with US size and millimeter size. But it's like a US 8 is 5 millimeters
Yes.
and a US 10 is 6 millimeter. But like a US 15 is 10 millimeters. And it's not like a 16. It's not like you double the US size and
Yeah.
you suddenly have double the girth in millimeters. In fact, once you go past a 10 or 11, they start jumping by 2 numbers instead of 1. I'm sure there's a reason for that. Like it goes 11 and then 13 and then 15 and then 17 and 19. And I'm sure there's a reason for that. But
And then it goes 19, 35, and 50.
and 50 and then
And then
70.
70.
And then and on the lower end, they had done numbers and then someone wanted a needle that's in between. So there's a 1.5 US, but it's not 1.5 millimeters. And there's a 2.5. And so it's a little wonky. And then if you go over to the UK or a lot of places that were influenced by the UK, the numbering system is the opposite. If as the number on the package gets bigger, the needle gets smaller. So the universal constant is millimeter size. A 4 millimeter in the US is a 6, is a US 6. And it's something else in the UK, right? But it's still a 4 millimeter. So when in doubt, go by millimeter size.
Because the US generally doesn't use certain millimeter sizes, it looks like we go from a 10 and 10 and a half to an 11, but
And
there's
in
actually
betweens.
2 millimeter sizes in there.
So there's a 10 3/4 and a 10 7/8,
Which
and like again,
Is a 7 and a 7.5 millimeter.
which is just like brain melting. I can already feel it. But but it's more commonly used. They're like half millimeter sizes that you would want, but the US doesn't tend to manufacture them as often. So again, not to make it a big huge hot mess, but it's kind of a big huge hot
Well,
mess.
I was talking to Marion, shout out to Marion, about when you're going down from an 11, because everybody's like, okay, I have to go down 2 needle sizes for the bind off.
It's a much bigger jump.
It's a much,
other-
it's not like going from a 10 to an 8. It's like going from, a 10
Yeah.
to a 5 or
It
something, because
jumps
there's
quite
2
a
more
bit.
needle
Yeah.
sizes in there.
Well, and so when someone comes in and says, I need an 8 millimeter, I go, are you sure? Especially depending on the yarn they're using or the pattern, because they might need a US 8, but they just kind of jump and call it an 8 millimeter. They make some assumptions because an 8 is not an 8 millimeter. And the same thing can happen with yarn and thicknesses, which is Liz's brilliant idea for the day. And we'll transition there and go back to her teeny tinies and work our way up. Is people will come in and say, I need a 4-ply, but they really mean a number 4 in this weight classification system that one organization made that not all yarn companies use. And 4-ply in some countries
Means something
completely different, much thinner. So we talked about it before, but we're going to revisit it because we may have new people on the channel who haven't gone and watched all the old episodes. which is totally fine. But if you need to binge watch something and need some entertainment, we're there, you know. So weight. I give intro knitters and crocheters this crash course in weight and what it means, because it sounds like, okay, one yarn is heavier than another, when it's yes and no, you know. So usually if a yarn feels heavier than another, it has to do with the fiber that's in it, and the way it's constructed can change how heavy something feels. But when knitters and crocheters and yarny people in general talk about weight, they're not talking about, oh my gosh, I can't pick this up off the floor, whereas this other one floats like a cloud. There's a caveat to that. I'll come back to that. But
In weaving, they have the same thing, like what classifications. It's how many yards fit in a standard measurement.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay, because I shouldn't talk the whole time, right? Yeah, it's what I talk about with people is when I do that crash course, I have them go, like, I put out a range of yarn like we have on the table right now, which you can kind of see, maybe not. And I have them all pick one, and I have them find the information part of it. And we talk about like how many yards basically are in each ball. Like this one, not that one, because that's different, but this one and this one, they both are, like, the info on them both say 100 grams. And that's a very typical yarn. Often, not always, comes packaged in like 100 grams or 50 grams or something like that. And then I say, okay, how many yards in this one? And how many yards in this one? So what's the difference? And it's like, oh, this is thinner, this is thicker. And so there's not as much here as here. And so we kind of get to this whole, when the word weight is thrown out in the yarny world, we're talking about how thin or thick the yarn is. Because technically, if you got like 100 yards, if you got the same length of all of these yarns and weighed them, they would weigh different amounts. Like 100 yards of this is going to weigh a lot more than 100 yards of this, because it's a lot thinner. But the converse way to look at that, because all this yarn comes in like set packaging, like of 100 grams. It's like, if we're going to weigh out 100 grams of this stuff, you're going to get a lot more yardage from the stuff that's thinner than you are of the stuff that's thicker.
It does not necessarily mean that it's going to last longer depending on your project.
No, because it depends on the needles you're using and all that. Yeah, there's so many caveats to all of this.
If you go with the lace weight and or the ethereal, and it doesn't work on the size needles you want to do.
Good at practicing that word.
No, I hate it. I like the ethereal.
Wait, I said at the beginning of this, we can call it ethereal from here on out. Go ahead.
It may or may not be an exciting experience. Like, because a lot of people are like, well, I'll just get thin yarn and
I'll get more yardage.
I'll get more yardage out of it.
Yeah.
But you may or may not like the process.
Yeah. And the other thing that all of these yarns will have, they tend to have on the label somewhere on the ball band, a recommendation of what needle size or hook size. Usually the yarn molds are a lot more knitting friendly than crochet friendly, unfortunately. So more knitting than crochet, but some have both. Of what needle size to use to get an average size stitch, like where it won't look too gappy or too tight for that yarn. And if you use that recommended needle, with the caveat that everyone knits tight and looser than somebody else, you might only get as far with each of these 100 grams if you use the right size needle with all of them. It's hard to predict that. So it's not like, oh, so much more yardage, I'm going to be golden. It's like your stitches could look crappy if you go too big. And if you go with the right size needle, it might not get you as far as you
give you the feel that you're looking for.
There's so many more caveats on this. But so we're just going to go over generally, like the scale of the basic scale of yarn, which one organization decided to put numbers on 1 through 6 or 7, is most of what we have on the table. But where Liz starts is on the thinner end, like it doesn't even fit on the spectrum. So let's start with the super thin, and then we'll tell you when we're hitting like more classically named weights. So you already saw this morning what Liz showed you, the ethereal.
It
teeny,
is
teeny, tiny.
1,860 yards per 25 grams. So
So-
multiply that by 4 for 100 grams.
Want me to?
You could math.
I can't math in my head for that. What was it?
1860.
60 times 4. 7,440 yards. In
Per-
if it was this big, if we put it on the scale and it weighed 100 grams, that's ridiculous and would get so tangled. Oh my gosh. Okay,
Gossamer.
none of these are part of the classic 1 through 6 numbers.
These are like heirloom knitting. And
So-
when they tell you heirloom, run
Heirloom
away.
means be very, very scared.
Yes.
Or be ready to work on it for the rest of your life. How much yardage?
$8.99. This is $8.99 for 25 grams.
So for 100 is just a nice round number to like wrap your brain around, kind of. 100 grams of that would be 3,596 yards.
So we're getting thicker.
We are getting thicker. That's a lot thicker.
We have
still can't see it on camera.
we've
It's a lot
had
thicker.
this one skein of cobweb.
It's about to go home with Liz.
It is of
So-
cobweb weight.
Cobweb is like just is the next one thinner than the classic scale of yarn.
And it is 1,641 yards per 100 grams. So it's like we're halving,
We're doubling
Or-
the thickness.
doubling. Yeah, we're doubling the
We're
thickness.
halving the yardage.
Halving the yardage.
I know.
as
Yeah.
up to-
So that stuff, and look, you can kind of see it. Yeah, I can't even see that still.
Yeah.
But cobweb, so it's cobweb implies super, super thin, right? But there's thinner, we have discovered. Okay. And we have very little, if anything, left in the shop that is cobweb. We're hitting the range of stuff we start to carry. And what we start to carry hitting the next one. We don't carry a whole lot because not a lot of people knit with it. In terms of, well, people knit with what Liz is holding, but lace weight is actually not quite a number on the scale.
it's 0. I've
Okay,
seen
there's a
zeros.
0. Okay, so when I say one, it's more like there's 8 or 9 numbers on this scale, but a 0 for some people would be considered lace weight.
I want to say that the yardage for mohair, which is right around 300 or 200, add 10%, 220 yards
Mhm.
per 25
She
grams.
just mathed, and it was easy one too, and it took her a minute.
It's
Yes.
220 yards times 4.
880. That makes sense. It's twice the yardage of what sock or fingering weight. That's the one we're going to come to next.
It's just thinner or about the same as lace weight.
Mhm. Well, and mohair. So mohair is really fluffy, right? Mohair has this what we call a halo on it. So often it'll recommend knitting on bigger needles than you would think a teeny tiny yarn should be, and it can take up more space than a lot of other lace weights. But the yardage is still the same.
And it calls for 4.5 on this flavor.
A 4.5 millimeter, and that's a 7
Yeah, because it wants the fluff.
because it wants you to fluff. But I have a hat that I've made out of mohair that was done on 4s and 5s, US 4s and 5s. So that's smaller. But lace weight is a 0, and lace weight is pretty teeny tiny in my opinion. We don't carry a lot of it in the shop that's not mohair because not a lot of people are looking for it, because not a lot of people knit with it. But the one that we do have in the shop is the Mayu lace, which we've talked about before. And that is what you're holding is 50 grams, right? So not the 100 grams, 50 grams. And how much yardage is on that?
It is 437 yards. It's the same yardage as for half the weight, the heavy ball. It is half the yard, or it is the
So
same yardage.
it's
as
still the whole 800
Yeah.
plus almost 900. And remember, I'm making one of my ranunculi on lace weight, and you can see through it. Not as much as her ethereal. I'm going with hers now. This is lace weight on a 10, and this is lace weight on a US 1.5. But it's still lace weight. It's still like you can just barely see it on camera, right? So that's a 0. And what I'm talking about with the numbering system is sometimes you'll see, like I'll show you on this guy. Sometimes you'll see a number in like a ball of yarn on the back there. Like that one's a 6. And they have different names. sometimes for these classifications, we're telling you what a pattern will often say. So I don't even know what the 0 usually says, but we call it lace weight. They might call it light or super fine or something like that. Because again, the organization, and I forget which one it was, that came up with these numbers is trying to like have some proprietary control over it. So next up can be called sock or fingering. The general category is fingering weight. Some people will also call it sock weight because most of what's called sock is fingering, but not all fingering is sock.
It's the content.
It's the content. If it's got some nylon blended with the wool, you use it for socks. I mean, you can use anything for socks, but if you want to call it a sock yarn, it'll have some nylon in it. But that is actually a number 1 in that little ball band thingy. And
the average fingering sock content yardage is 437 yards. It's 400 meters.
400 meters.
I know
and
that.
Roughly add 10% to get to yards, but see, it's a little less than 10%.
In our shop,
Mm-hmm.
Fingering weight goes from 399 all the way to 460.
That's the other thing that
It's a range.
There's a range for each of these. It's not like each of these weights, there's only one thickness and one thickness only, and that's all you're going to find. Because there's so many different thicknesses of yarn. There's a range that will fit into what's called fingering. And the fiber spates that we love to use is called a 4-ply in the UK. This is Vivacious 4-ply. And it's a little bit looser spin and fluffier than some of our other fingering weights. So there's only 399 yards on this. Whereas we have some fingering weights that have like 460 something.
463 on.
So they'll be different thicknesses, and that will frustrate people when they come into the shop. Because if a pattern calls for one skein of fingering weight yarn, if it needs every single square inch of it and it's a regular fingering weight, this will run short. And that's frustrating, but that's kind of life. So unfortunately, fingering, like the shawl kits I'm putting together, that I pulled a bunch back here for local yarn store day, and we're probably not going to have time to show off, but that's okay because this is much more fascinating, I think. The Casapinka shawl calls for 2 skeins of fingering weight yarn, and that makes a nice lightweight shawl. Like there are a lot of patterns out there that use fingering weight yarn for shawls. And pet peeve, I don't want to, I'm hoping I don't upset anyone with this, but I have to say it. It is not fingerling. It is fingering. But lots of people just call it fingerling. And I just roll with it when it comes into the shop, but I'll say it here on camera. And if you call it fingerling, no worries, but that's not what it is. It might be more fun to say, and it might be more what you're geared to say, but isn't it like fingerling is potatoes?
Fingerling is potato.
It's a type of potato. And I don't say that to call anybody out or to make anyone feel ashamed or anything, because go with your bad self. Call it fingerling if it works for you, but just know it's fingering. It's like play with the fingers, I guess. I don't know, but or it's the right size for socks is where the sock thing came from. But fingering, I guess, there must have been something. Some of these we know about, and some of them we don't.
I haven't investigated fingering.
We will have to look up fingering, but it's fingering weight, as in like maybe it's delicate on your fingers. I don't know, or I would make gloves out of it personally. But yes, fingerling is a potato. And not what it actually is, but mythologically it's almost become that. It's not in the Urban Dictionary yet though, so I'm not going to use it. So moving on.
The next number would be a number 2 or a sport weight.
And I think they call number 2 like light or something.
Well, this is number 2 fine. It
fine.
depends on.
I think light is what number 3 is.
Yeah, but that's a number 3
in
light.
Our vocabulary, it's not a light number 3. Like all number 3s in the thing
I've never
say
seen...
light.
Huh.
They really do. Let me just, I mean, it looks like it should be a light 3. No, they're all 3s are called light, and then 4s are called me. It's weird.
Oh yeah.
It's really weird.
It is.
But we're using the classic nomenclature of weights. So a number 2. Okay, fine. What they call fine is what a lot of the yarn world traditionally calls sport weight.
Yes.
I guess like sporty things are a little bit lighter than some of the heavier stuff. We haven't investigated where that name comes from either.
And walkabout is a pretty classic sport weight.
Middle of the road sport
Middle
weight.
of the road. It is 157 yards per 50 grams.
Which at 157, let's round it up to say 160, means that it is 320 yards for 100 grams. So you can see kind of the comparison of how things, we're going from like 440-ish, rounding to make numbers easier, to 320 yards per 100 grams. And sport weights become really popular. It's like right in between fingering and the next thing we're going to talk about. And we don't have a ton of it in the shop, but so many patterns are coming out asking for sport weight. And we have to go, okay, we can show you our mild selection of sport weight. And then you can either go down or up if you want it a little heavier or a little lighter. So the next one up, which we have a couple examples of to show off how wide a range there is, it is DK, which people see on a pattern and they're like, what the heck? But number 3, which the council that made these numbers calls light, is usually in classic nomenclature called DK,
which stands for double knitting, and it's about the same thick as when you would hold 2 strands of fingering weight yarn together.
Yes, so if you double fingering, because I think sport as a thickness, which is in between the two, arose later in life, in history. So when you hold 2 of these together, when it's double the thickness of this, and you're knitting with double the fingering weight, that next one they called DK. But now there's one in between. So there's just fingering, lace, fingering. We're going to review as we go. It's like the name game where you have to go and say everybody in the circle, and you hope that you're not last and you have to remember everybody in the circle. Lace, fingering, sport, DK, which I'll put this down so it's not more confusing, DK. But that's a really thin DK. We call it a light DK. And this is a really thick DK. I call it a heavy DK. Again, think those weight terminology gets chucked in here of if something is thin, we call it light. And if something is thick, we call it heavy. It doesn't mean that these will weigh the same if you put them on a scale. These 2 balls of yarn. Doesn't mean this ball is heavier. This skein is heavier, but it's thicker. So I'll call it heavy.
This skein of DK is 382 yards. So
it's sport weight yardage. But I think the manufacturers want it to be knit on a bigger needle and fluff a little. They want it to be knit in the DK weight range.
Yeah.
And I've used it for both sport and DK patterns. This guy, so that was the Jody Long Alba, by the way. This is the fiber spates, but the DK, it says it on the tag, the vivacious DK, versus their other tag says 4-ply, because that's kind of the British nomenclature for fingering. This one has 251 yards on it. That's more of a classic DK, is 250 to 300 yards. And the next thickness up tends to have about 200 to 220. So they're kind of close to each other. But I've used this for the next thickness up patterns as well. So there's just when things get clear, they get more complicated. So this is a standard classic number 4, which is not a 4-ply, but a number 4 in that ball band little symbol thing. It's worsted weight, which again, weird word, right? But Cascade 220, Encore from Plymouth even says worsted on the label. It's medium. I think even number 4 say medium or something like that. It's right in the middle, even though we've gone through a bunch of numbers already and there's not that many left. This is considered middle of the road. And what is your history on worsted?
Worsted comes from Worstead, England. They used to do a lot of milling and manufacturing, like worsted weight suits come from there, and worsted spun and worsted weight.
And it can have to do with how the yarn is made and stuff too. But when we're talking about thickness, and we're actually running out of time, when we're talking about thickness, it's middle of the road. It's what I like to teach on, because a lot of stuff, I mean, there's trends now in the big box stores for big and fluffy and all this other stuff, but a good chunk of what you find in the big box stores is worsted weight, is going to be knit on a size 8 needle, all that kind of stuff, 5 millimeter. The next category up is chunky or bulky. a number 5. You'll find it referred to in 2 different ways, depending on what yarn company is doing what. Like that's got a number 5 on it. I think they call it a bulky. But it's also called like that's ultra wool chunky. And when we have people come into the shop and say, I want chunky yarn, we need to figure out.
We show them.
This is what we show them. But we need to figure out sometimes before we walk them over to that section, where did they learn that word from? Because they could have come across the YouTube trend of making chunky blankets. And those chunky blankets are like thicker than this. So when we show them this, they think we're crazy. But in the traditional yarn world, bulky or chunky is this stuff. And okay, I'll look at that in a second. And you know, not quite the same thickness, but pretty close. It's a little thicker.
45 yards for.
And I have 131 yards. So close, but it's going to be anywhere from 100 to 150 yards per 100 grams.
Depending on fiber content.
Yeah. And it goes with thicker. These both have a number 5 bulky on them. So, and then and people hear bulky. And again, they think about this stuff. They think about the bigger, but the super bulky, this is super bulky. This is the next thickness. This is a number 6 at bigger needles, bigger yarn, big fluffy stuff. But the difference you can have, this difference we're about to show off is actually about how it's constructed. Because this is just a single ply loose twist, and you only get about 50 yards per 100 grams.
This is a chainette construction.
A lot looser, a lot more open.
And you get 114 yards.
So that sounds like it should be a bulky, but it's meant to fluff up a lot. It's actually a lot thicker than a bulky. It's a super bulky. So, and they want you to knit it on a bigger needle.
Yep.
So these guys are big and fluffy.
They're recommending a 15 for this.
Yeah. And they'll recommend anywhere from
11
an
to
11 to a 17 for this.
Yeah.
So even though there's a ton more yardage there, you can knit these on smaller needles. It will behave very differently. So that's super bulky. Again, you don't get a whole lot when it doesn't have that loose chainette, so it doesn't weigh a lot on the scale. You're not getting a whole lot. Like our Encore Mega, which is a super bulky, you get about 64 yards. So you're not getting a ton per skein, but it's big and fluffy and lovely. We don't have a whole lot of anything bigger than super bulky in the shop because that's kind of where the classic range ends. They have made a number 7 they call jumbo, and there's like basically a jumbo covers anything bigger than a super bulky. So there's no like set definition for jumbo. It's just honking big. And this one, which is really fun, super fine wool, super soft, lovely, luscious 2-ply. This is called Yana XL from Amano, and it is 200 grams. So this is twice on the scale what one of these is. And there's only 54 yards. So again, it's halving it again.
We have another jumbo yarn that is 400 grams and you get 50 yards ish, because as it gets thicker, the Cascade alpaca that
stuff they don't make anymore.
They don't make anymore.
Stuff. Yeah. But like
once you go jumbo, you're getting more
grams.
than 200 grams.
You need 200 grams to get the same yardage you get out of 100 grams of this stuff.
Yeah.
So it starts getting big, and then you need really big needles or else you just can't work it. So that's our crash course on weight. I think we've done it before, but maybe we did it in a different weight this time, a different way this time. I can't speak anymore because the shop should be open. So we need to wrap up. So we have knit night tomorrow night from Friday night from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Get in with the shop phone number
828-877-3550.
Yeah, don't try to multitask with ethereal. Oh my gosh. I wouldn't recommend it.
Nope.
And then local yarn store day is Saturday. You can buy a kit online for the Rick Rack shawl from Casa Pinka and early, and we can send you stuff, codes and stuff on Friday night or Saturday for that. But next week is the yarn crawl, and we're so super excited about it. And we talked about things on Tuesday. We will have a very limited filming, if at all, schedule next week. And we may not be having sit and stitch next week. We have to still gauge that, but watch social media, or we'll put out a really brief announcement on the YouTube channel about what's happening with that. We're already tired just getting ready, so we're expecting to be exhausted. And I don't want to neglect our faraway community. with that, but oh my gosh, there's just so much to do still. I will say, so Saturday we've got 20% off everything but kits and sale stuff online too, with LYSDAY 2022 is the code. Next week, Tuesday through Saturday, I haven't made the code yet, but I'll put it out for everybody. Online, you can save 10%. In shop, you have a chance to save more. And it's more, unfortunately, for people who can't get here, about people who can get here next week. We can't do everything. If we figure out anything fun for people next week, we will let you know. But just getting ready for people in shop is overwhelming right now, especially because I lost days because of my cat. I'm happy to report he's back to his waking me up at 4 o'clock in the morning self. But I lost time. So
we are very much watching our numbers for our
Yes.
YouTube only sale. It will not happen until after the crawl is over.
Yeah. And we'll make announcements about that, but it will not happen until the crawl is over. And you cannot use it early. You cannot call us and say, but, or I'd like to, or we gotta wait. And we'll make announcements when it happens. There's a good chance we could hit 900 today, which is so awesome. And we thank you so much. And that's so wonderful and so exciting. We cannot do the sale until the crawl is over. We have to buckle down for the crawl. And then we will celebrate how awesome the channel has become and how much you all have participated in that. So if you haven't subscribed, please consider that. If you'd like to support us, it's one of those, well, even with a mega sale, I don't need anything right now, but you'd like to support the work and the entertainment that we provide, we have a Patreon account where you could sign up for a monthly subscription, and Patreon gives you swag if you stick with it long enough, which is really cool. So patreon.com/sundragon, check that out. And we need to go open the shop. So we love you so much, and we will see you sporadically over the next week. And say some prayers for us, or have positive vibes for us that we survive. We will try to show you proof of life on occasion. All right, bye.